So I'm going to introduce Betsy Bell. She's a longtime justice advocate living in Seattle, twice widowed and grandmother to 17 young children. Her anti-war memoir, Open Borders, is a personal story of love, loss, and anti-war activism, published in October 2018. Betsy recounts her efforts, along with many others, to end the Cold War nuclear weapon buildup. Betsy's focus is on building friendships across international boundaries, believing that we will not harm people with whom we share the common love of family and place. Betsy has published several short memoir pieces and many poems in literary journals. So it's my pleasure to introduce Betsy Bell. Sure.
Thank you very much. Okay. I want to thank No More Bombs. Are we ready to go?
Yep.
Okay. I want to thank the No More Bombs Committee and you, Bud, for inviting me to speak. I have to confess that the last 3 years since Open Borders was published have been kind of a roller coaster of hope and despair and even terror. In the preface of my book, and I'm going to read to you from it because this was written in 2017, published in 2018. Today, I am more frightened by the possibility of nuclear war than I was in 1982. I also feel alone. If there are others trembling before the fire and fury rhetoric and the repeating rocket and hydrogen tests, I hope this story of our activism will stir them to find ways to organize, to seek peace through cross-border understandings of our common humanity and the love we each have for our homeland. Why does it seem so few are alarmed at the threat of nuclear war today? Are we in denial or overwhelmed by the enormity of so many doomsday crises at once? Or have we, as I worry, left behind as antiquated that practice humans have engaged in for millennia, gathering groups to work things out with minds firmly connected to their hearts? Eye-to-eye conversations are much more effective than thumbs tapping through electronic devices. Through the latter half of the 20th century, as much of the Kremlin and Russia and the White House disagreed with how our world should be organized, one felt the leaders grasped their sober responsibility for the future of the whole world and genuinely did not want to put all that firepower to use. Today, I am not so sure. Putting words on paper is my way of taking up arms again. Action gives me hope. Well, at my very first reading after publishing my book, it was in 2018, the chairman of the Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, Bruce Robinson, was in the audience. Apparently, I was not alone after all. PSR had come back to life across the country and in Washington, D.C., and many chapters across the country were building a grassroots movement to stop the growing worldwide escalation of nuclear and potential nuclear powers. Bruce invited me to join the Nuclear Abolition Task Force of WPSR and the Washington Against Nuclear Weapons Coalition, becoming an anti-nuclear activist again at age 80. Once again, I lobbied our members of Congress in Washington, D.C., this time with more confidence than when I visited D.C. in 1983. This time, I left behind a signed copy of my book, not just photocopies of news articles and a personal essay asking for the reopening of travel between the USSR and the US. Under the last administration, discouragement outweighed hope. Wouldn't you agree with that? The last 4 years. The current military budget includes obscene amounts of money to replace the old stationary missiles, obsolete in the present form and useless in an all-out war. The money is being spent. In September, the Air Force gave the defense company Northrop Grumman an initial contract contract of $13.3 billion to begin engineering and manufacturing in-the-ground missiles, a deadly instrument no one wants to detonate. We have so much to do to turn this folly around. Again, I thank you for inviting me to speak. My intention is to enliven a sense of hope for a nuclear-free future in you, and in so doing, find that hope inside myself once again. So in the book, in the 1980s, Seattle, a backwater place far from the East Coast center of things, was waking up to its significance on the world stage in the struggle between the Soviet Union and the USSR and the US for world domination. And I am going to share my screen and show you a few slides here. Let's see if I can get this going. Okay. The arrival of the Trident nuclear submarine in August of 1982 revealed a vulnerability to annihilation that people, many people in the Seattle area, felt at the deepest level. The threat became real to us. These signs appeared around town. People started asking, if Seattle is a target, what can we do to keep the bombs from falling? A group of people from various agencies and professions gathered to discuss what could be done about Seattle's position at ground zero. This group conceived of a 10-day series of educational events called Target Seattle, Preventing Nuclear War. I'm going to read to you a little bit about how that went. Target Seattle teach-ins attracted thousands of people in Seattle. It was encouraging to listen to the constructive thinking of people like Archibald Cox, Linus Pauling, and Dr. Helen Caldecott, who is the chairman of the International Physicians for Social Responsibility. 4 good friends, women, wrote a letter, so much like the song that was just sung, wrote a letter asking people in Seattle's sister city, Tashkent, in Uzbekistan, to join us in working to prevent nuclear war. The peace letter said, the people of Seattle and Tashkent are united through the Sister City program, through our love for our cities, and through the hopes we share for our children's futures. Yet if there is a nuclear war, all that we value would be destroyed. We must work together to create peaceful means of resolving conflicts and taking steps to reduce the danger of nuclear war. The committee printed hundreds of 8.5 by 14 copies of this note, Cyrillic letters running beneath the English, leaving room for signatures at the bottom. Organizers carried these letters to Target Seattle teach-ins, the schools and the churches, and at the final event, when 20,000 people gathered in the Kingdom, 42,000 people, Seattleites who feared our planet would be blown to smithereens by the Soviets or the Americans, signed them. Each person penned his or her name with the hope that someone like themselves living in Tashkent would read the letter. Grade school children signed in block letters and added drawings in the margins, peace signs and mushroom clouds. One first grade child told her teacher she wasn't afraid of bombs dropping on her school because her daddy went to meetings every week to stop them. When the Target Seattle events ended, the committee called a meeting to decide how to get these letters to real people on the other side of the Iron Curtain. At the bottom of each one was printed the promise, this letter will be sent to Seattle's Russian sister city, Tashkent, and to the government officials of the Soviet Union and the United States. We laughed when we talked about mailing them, imagining the boxed up letters sitting on the mayor of Tashkent's desk, how he'd marvel at the sentimentality of Americans as his colleagues looked over his shoulder. Then we figured he'd throw the whole mess in a dumpster behind the office buildings. That is, if the boxes ever got to Uzbekistan. Our little band of travelers, there were 33 of us, went off to Tashkent, the capital of Uzbekistan, Seattle's sister city since 1971, armed with these letters. The first radio interview I had about open borders was with Marge Twisdale of Radio Vashon. Woman in her 50s, she stopped me midway and asked me to place the 80s in the context of the Cold War as a whole. So let's put Target Seattle into that context. In this slide, we see the American and the US and the USSR soldiers congratulating each other over the victory over the Axis powers. This was taken at the Elbe River in April 25th of 1945. Just a few months later, George Kennan argued that the Soviet regime was inherently expansionist and that its influence had to be contained in areas of vital strategic importance to the United States. These texts provided justification for the Truman administration's new anti-Soviet policy. And just a month after this speech writing by George Kennan came Nikolai Novikov, the Soviet ambassador in Washington. He declared that the foreign policy of the US is striving for world supremacy, and that the United States is working toward and establishing a naval and air bases stretching far beyond the boundaries of the United States through arms race and through the creation of ever newer weapons. Sounds a little bit like today. So this is what the map looked like at the height of the Cold War. All the turquoise areas are the American, we were not just on our own continent. We were over in the NATO countries, and you can see these little dots are even down in the Caribbean and in the North Africa, and they're over in the China Sea also. So the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists in 1947 placed the doomsday clock at 7 minutes to midnight. These two pictures next to the doomsday clock in 47 were taken in the 1960s. Coretta Scott King is leading a group of women protesting nuclear war, and another group on the other side are in New York State. So the protest against nuclear weapons began pretty early. Now, when I was writing this book, back in 1982, the doomsday clock was at 4 minutes to midnight. And I remember there's a troupe doing a play about that, and it just got my attention, just riveted me. It gave me nightmares. Now, this is the 2021 statement of the Bulletin for Atomic Scientists, 100 seconds to midnight. So now that context is clear, let's go back to 1982. One of the goals of Target Seattle was to awaken people from lethargy, from apathy, and to arouse them to action. Target Seattle wanted to turn their fear into a sharp sense of concern, an awakening to the fact that we had entrusted our future to a small group of cold warriors who by intention or by accident could incinerate the whole earth. So the first thing we wanted to do was to explore the alternatives. Peace through strength position, accompanied by the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, was the Reagan administration's approach. Unilateral disarmament was the largest peace movement in the UK. And then the nuclear freeze campaign was adopted by many faith-based organizations and the Democratic Party as part of their platform. David Brower reminded us that love is a resource we will lose if we forget to use it. Our letter was a communication of that love. So our children were practicing duck and cover in their elementary classrooms, and children and their parents were suffering terrible nightmares. We knew that everyone who signed the letter had invested their signature with hope for another way. So those 33 people, none of us started out to be heroes. Not all our goals were lofty. Some were curious about Russia, some about the USSR, some about our own government's activities. I think fear was the primary motivator, fear of losing everything we hold dear. In one recent interview about open borders, an interviewer said he grew up with the threat of nuclear war hanging over his head. It was the backdrop to his childhood and his teenage years. For us in 1982, it was raw, new, and it dominated. We prepared for the trip by inviting Soviet experts to coach us on how to behave, what to say when we got engaged in conversations. We practiced, role played, how to speak to someone who asked us questions on the street. Our very first stop, we took our peace petitions. Everybody had a packet of them in their suitcase sitting right on top. So we went through customs that everybody would have their letters noticed. We managed to get through customs in Moscow. Our very first visit was with Yuri Zhukov. He's the man on the left. He is the chair of the Soviet Peace Committee. And he was looking forward to seeing us. And you'll see on the table right in front of his microphone is a copy of the letter with signatures on it. Now, my husband, this handsome man there on the right, is talking with Masha Reichert, who was a student at the University of Washington and had spent several years in Moscow doing a degree and spoke Russian fluently. So she came along with us as his private translator. And at that meeting with Yuri Zhukov, they were consulting back and forth, making sure that any remarks, any translation was true to both Don when he had the microphone and from Yuri Zhukov and anyone else who spoke. So when we got to Tashkent, the mayor and his staff spread the red carpet of welcome for us. There were speeches and concerts and school visits and a peace rally. So one of the first things we did was go to the public market, and everybody carried their peace letters and started handing them out on the street. This is a construction guy and his crew, and probably the lady there who brought them their tea break right next to the public market, and he's reading the letter to everybody. And here's a young man who came up on his bicycle, read the letter, and then sped off on his bike to find other young people, and they all came up on their bicycles, and one little girl with her friends gave us candy in exchange for the letters. They were so excited. And the next day, we are in the local newspaper. We have done something that is illegal, punishable by I don't know what. And we have made the newspaper, and everybody's all excited. And after that, one of the deputies said, "You have to give the rest of the letters to us. You're not allowed to pass them out on the street." We hadn't asked anybody's permission. We just did it. So I'd like to read to you about the meeting with the mayor and his staff. It shows you to the extent to which we went to make our friendship real. So Don stood up to make his remarks to the assembled group of gratitude for our reception and to state the purpose of our trip. We have come to ask you, the citizens of Tashkent, to join with us to encourage our governments to avoid nuclear war so that our children and our communities will thrive in mutual friendship for generations to come. He went on to explain the nature of the letter, that 42,000 of our citizens had signed it, and that it was our privilege to pass out copies to the people in Tashkent public market earlier in the day. As I watched him speak, I noticed his open blue eyes and careful goatee, his lean face, average height, and slim waist. He was a dead ringer for Lenin. It was obvious his face silhouetted against the proverbial portrait of the most favored leader plastered on the chamber's wall. I could see the other people noticing the likeness too. After speaking, Don handed the mayor the unrolled poster with a copy of the letter in 3 languages. Days before our departure from Seattle, someone had the idea of printing the poster not only in Russian and English, but also in Uzbek. The mayor passed the poster on to his deputy without looking at it and proceeded with the presentation of gifts. Seconds later, the staffer, having read the poster and discovered the Uzbek translation, tugged at the mayor's sleeve, interrupting the proceedings. He pointed to the letter in Uzbek, Cyrillic script with slight differences. The mayor took the poster into both hands and shushed the crowd. Their ethnicity had been acknowledged. He began to read to the assembly in Uzbek. Smiles spread on every face. The Uzbeks looked at each other and stood to reach across the table, grinning broadly, golden steel teeth gleaming. They were thanking us for recognizing them, people living under the reach of the Soviet Union, but not Russian. In Uzbekistan, all government people were required to work in the Russian language, and many were ethnically Russian, transplanted to Uzbekistan for top government jobs. It was not obvious to me who was Russian and who Uzbek, but it was clear that addressing them as Turkic-speaking people acknowledged their republic as different. They embraced our gesture wholeheartedly. Virginia, and that's Virginia McDermott, who was Don's co-chair leading this trip. Virginia remembers the conversation she had with the deputy mayor that evening. Quote, "For years, we've been waiting for you to come. I lost both of my sons and my husband in the war. I don't want to lose my grandchildren." So after our trip, next, the peace rally, very important. The peace rally was held the next day, and it became quite a tense moment because about 3 weeks before we got to Tashkent, President Reagan had given his evil empire speech to the evangelical breakfast. And the person who spoke to this assembled crowd right before Don was supposed to speak challenged us to respond to them being called an evil empire. And here's what Don had to say. Don stepped to the microphone. He chose his words carefully, taking in the faces in the crowd. He spoke slowly, pausing after each phrase to wait for the translation. Quote, "We come in peace. We are ordinary, independent citizens, not sponsored by our government. Our leaders speak angry words. We speak kind, personal words to each other. We love our country as you love yours. We want to see our children grow up and marry, as do you. As people, we can know each other and wish for each other's happiness." He went on to emphasize the will of ordinary men and women as more important, even more powerful than one leader's angry words. After our trip, I worked with Marlo Boyer, our young photographer, to create a multimedia slideshow to use as a way to promote more sister city relations, more citizen engagement and travel across the borders into so-called enemy territory. My goal then was to encourage other cities to establish sister city relations in the USSR. Seattle was the first, and our close relationship never stopped, primarily because our connection with Tashkent never wavered. In spite of the invasion of Afghanistan by the USSR or the Korean airliner incident, or even local pressure from Russian and Baltic Americans to exit the relationship. Many newly organized Seattle groups like the Peace Chorus, Peace Park Builders, amputee soccer players, to name a few, traveled to or were planning trips to the USSR. Some of these groups still exist, the Peace Chorus, for example. So one of the questions you might be asking is, how did the US officials, government officials and members of Congress react to our efforts in 1983. I wanted to focus on this part of my book. The love and loss part is an undercurrent in the story, and you'll have to read that yourselves if you get a copy to pick up that part. But I'm focused mostly on our delegation and the Washington reaction. So I went to Washington D.C. in 1983 in the spring, before the slideshow was ready. I was full of my belief that we could make a difference if we could just open the borders. So I want to just read to you. It was April, it was spring. So Washington, D.C. was in the throes of spring heat wave. The air was thick and smelled of a mixture of trapped car exhaust and spent cherry blossoms. After I parked my rental car, I walked to the Senate office building and stood in front of the structure in a state of panic. I mouthed an opening sentence and then I shook my head. I had no idea how to begin, but I did know why I had come. Inside, the click of my heels down the marble hallway gave a beat to the marching song playing in my head. Senator Jackson was not available. He sent his hardline advisor in his stead. The woman, a few years my senior, listened to me stammer through my story, then dispatched me with an inflexible party line about peace through strength. I left my packet and walked back down the long hall. A flood of self-deprecating thoughts dampened my zeal for this lobbying business. The woman thought I was a naive blue sky idealist with no practical sense, and maybe she was right. Maybe we were all naive to think citizens could make a difference. Was I a fool to think I could accomplish anything? I went back to the mall and found a tree to sit under. What I knew in my heart was what we demonstrated with our visit to Tashkent. An exchange between people of different cultures was a model of the kind of program that, when involving many groups and many themes, cooking, soccer, park building, educator, and physicians exchanges, choir tours, and dance troupes, could reduce the risk of first strike. In Seattle, hundreds of people were convinced of that fact. Fortified, I got up and headed for Senator Slade Gordon's office. Gordon, too, was unavailable. He handed me off to a young aide who towed the same party line. The look of disbelief on his face and his remarks stayed with me. They, the Russians, want what we have. There isn't enough to go around. We have to protect our resources from them. Someone, I think, might want to mute themselves. There's a little bit of background noise somewhere. So by 1988, Gorbachev was in power and the warlike rhetoric coming from the Kremlin and the White House softened. Oh, but I want to tell you one more incident when we found out what the government thought. This is going to make you laugh a little bit in horror. In this passage, you meet Cabby and Hyde Tennis, the former dean of the St. Mark's Episcopal Cathedral. And I want to read this to you because, so in the Reagan administration had tentatively agreed to send Caspar Weinberger, Secretary of Defense, to present the government's policy to the Second Target Seattle. But instead, he sent Edward Rowney, retired general and chief arms negotiator for the START Treaty. Rowney, by the way, I caught him on YouTube at age 100. He died about a year after that, but Rowney was he was in a suit and telling the world that he was still there. Rowney, who restated the government's peace through strength position, spoke on a panel with others who represented different views. All week long, teach-ins brought hundreds of people out. Then the final Sunday evening, the televised town meeting discussion took place again. Every participant played a part. Preventing nuclear war was everybody's business in Seattle. Edward Rowney didn't think nuclear war was anybody's business but the government. In his talk, he said the only person he knew who agreed with disarmament was his mother. That week, Hyde and Cabby Tennis gave a dinner party for about a dozen people in his honor. Rowney found himself in a room full of people who agreed with his mother. Virginia didn't get there in time for drinks, but later understood that some of what Rowney had said angered people. In spite of the delicious meal, showcasing a large stuffed zucchini from the Tennis's productive vegetable garden, the mood was awkward. During the meal, Rowney chatted with Virginia. She vividly remembers the conversation, ranging from friendly talk about children and how much coffee he'd needed to stay awake. At one point, he said to her, "The reason I agreed to come here was to find out what you people are thinking." She told him she appreciated that. After a pause, he asked expansively, "What shall I tell the president when I return to Washington?" "Tell the president that there are thousands of people here who are enraged by the threat of nuclear war." The general literally jumped in his chair and responded, "I couldn't possibly tell the president that." "Why not?" Virginia remembers asking. "Look, you don't have to worry about that. I'm working very hard on all this. I will save you." "What if I don't believe you?" "Then you're not worth saving." That comment was so outrageous, as much to Rowney as to Virginia, that they both laughed. So by 1988, Gorbachev was in power and the warlike rhetoric coming from the Kremlin and the White House softened. He and Reagan communicated in the conciliatory terms of the Glasnost. By 1990, the Berlin Wall was down and Russians came to Seattle to compete in the Goodwill Games held in the Husky Stadium. In 1990, we felt we had beaten back the threat of nuclear war. 75% of the nuclear weapons worldwide were dismantled. Part of that has all changed. A modernization of our nuclear arsenal begun under the Obama administration comes with a price tag of $27.6 billion. Part of the national security budget, which is a total of $1.21 trillion. We all suffer from a terrible annihilation anxiety today. Anyone under 50 has grown up with the knowledge, spoken or hidden, that the world holds in the ground or on the seas the potential for total destruction of life as we know it. Children like Greta Lundberg and all the children who've left their classrooms to stand up to us adults know that their future would be lost to global climate devastation. The deep anxiety that sits in each of us and will be transformed into hope through action. It can be and will be transformed into hope through action. Each of us can do a little something to reverse these two conditions, global warming and global nuclear winter. My dream is for the leaders of the nuclear powers, all 9 of them, to come together with their diplomats and staff for a 3-day conference in some remote, beautiful place. Their agreed upon topic would be how to avoid nuclear war. Let them look eye to eye and tell each other about their wives and their children, their homes, the places in nature they love to visit. Let them agree that a nuclear war would ruin all that. Let them agree to put their diplomatic teams to work to reverse this escalating threat. I know, it's a pipe dream. But recently, on January the 22nd, a treaty of the United Nations prohibiting nuclear weapons went into effect. The TPNW, Treaty to Prohibit Nuclear Weapons, was approved by the UN General Assembly in 2017. 51 nations have ratified that treaty. It is now illegal for a nation to have nuclear weapons. This, people, is the beginning of the end of nuclear weapons. The Trump administration accelerated the replacement and upgrading of our nuclear arsenal. It will be a big challenge for Biden to turn this around. This is where we come in. Anyone who wants to be part of this turnaround should be on the Washington Physicians for Social Responsibilities mailing list. Calls to action appear in nearly every monthly newsletter. Make your phone calls. On January 22nd, I called Murray's office and Cantwell's office early in the morning. I told them how excited I was about the treaty. I asked them to weigh their dependence on federal dollars flowing into Washington state from the national security budget against the now illegal nuclear weapons housed here. I asked them to take a leadership position in abolishing nuclear weapons from our state and nation. Would they take notice if they got 10 calls a day about this? If we could feel that fear that inspired us in 1982, we each might pick up the phone. Thanks for listening. I appreciate having a chance to read to you.
Well, Betsy, that was fabulous, and we so much respect what you've done, and I just thank you so much. So I've got 4 quick things here.
Yes.
We're going to have a brief question and answer period.
Okay.
Then I actually forgot, Joanne Dufour is part of a group, Olympia Coalition Against Nuclear Weapons, and she and several of the folks down in that area put on a class, and they're going to have the 6th class coming up just next week. And so, Joanne, what we're going to do is right after the question and answer period, I would like you to talk about that class for those that are interested. I will say that 3 of us from No More Bombs have attended and graduated from that class, and it is very professionally done. I mean, incredibly professionally done.
I just went through it. Yeah, I just went through it. I just went through it too, and I thought it was the most outstanding thing I've gone to.
Yeah,
about the nuclear war.
You, if you have pictures, Joanne, she's there, and Glenn Anderson's one of the instructors also. And then third, I'm just going to mention very briefly about our No More Bombs website, and then I'm going to do a book giveaway. So we plan to wrap this up in an hour, and thank you, but we'll start with question and answer for Betsy. The first one to ask a question gets a book.
Betsy, is Tashkent still a sister city of Seattle?
Yes, and the organization, Seattle Tashkent Sister City Organization, is very active in Seattle, with many Uzbeks and Russians and all young Americans, Seattleites in it. It's very active.
So do they do exchanges?
They still do exchanges. There was a recent visit to the Peace Park. Yeah. Nice. It's good. Yeah. Tashkent, Uzbekistan went through a period of almost a very disruptive period, but the Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood, is the government is stable and it's in good shape.
Betsy, do you want to comment about your espionage on sneaking those letters in?
Yes, well, we did. Yes, we did take 2 letters to refuseniks with us, which would have probably gotten us sent away from the country immediately if they'd been found. And they were wrapped inside of little, those little canisters that the film comes in, and they were in our photographer's camera bag. And we managed to carry them with us all the way to the last night in Leningrad, when Don and I went to the local post office and dropped them in the mailbox. But I don't know if you know who refuseniks are. They were the Jewish people who lived in the Soviet Union and asked for export visas. And yes, it's a long story. You should read the book. It explains all that. Yeah.
Other questions?
Betsy, have you visited the Federation of Russia?
The Federation of Russia. Have I visited?
Yes.
I have been in
since
not since then. No.
You went during it was the USSR, right?
I haven't been back to Russia since then. I haven't. I would love to.
Thank you. I would too. I would too. I'd love to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I belong to a group that is an international group with Helen Caldecott and Michio Kaku and Carl Grossman and Bruce Gagnon and many people internationally working to raise information and raise consciousness about the arming of space with nuclear weapons that power lasers that are aimed at the Earth. Trump thought it was all his idea with Space Force, but it exists and it has existed for over 25 years. I wonder if, and of course Russia is a target, but we have now over 800 bases around the world that are not wanted, all as legs of this arming of space for American hegemony. And unfortunately, with Elon Musk, who thinks that nukes, like Edward Teller did, are a great idea. Woo, well, hello, let's just get stupid. Thinks that nuking Mars will help make it habitable. Isn't that a swell idea? The thing is, Russia is still one of our targets. China is one of our targets. And I like what you said and what your letter said about love. And when will it come into fashion? Our project with Olga was based purely on love. Joan Cross and the Skagit citizens that got together, we were loving each other and loving our country and loving those across the sea.
Yeah.
Do you feel there's any way that we can possibly repair what the damage has been done these days? How we can bridge that gap, Betsy?
My only hope is that enough people, our people who make these decisions are elected officials. They have power. The only way we're going to turn them around is by influencing them, refusing, telling them we're not going to vote for them, putting other people up against them if they don't take some leadership in this. That's the democratic way. I don't know of any other way. I actually think it'd be great for us to get in travel groups and go off to North Korea or to Pakistan or to, but you see, we do have a sister city organization working for Iran that's very active, but the government is shutting it down, not allowing it to proceed. So this is the sister city thing is a fabulous way to do it, but you have to somehow get the government to let the thing begin to happen.
Well, we're pretty much captive right now in our own border and unfortunately unable to travel, or possibly fortunately for the other people who we can visit.
Exactly.
But thank you for your good work and your good writing. And I hope my third question gets me a book. But
Okay, Holly, one's coming your way.
Oh boy,
tonight.
Right. Okay.
Your song is beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wrote that in 1983, and we were that was part of our Olga project with the town photo. And I asked the tribe if we could meet on their side so that we'd have the town of Loch Hunter in the background, and we had friends dress up in their daily garb. So, I was the guitar player and Joan had the whole Tai Chi outfit on.
It's just wonderful.
Anyway, we had a wonderful community that still exists, and Tracy was part of that as well, and Julia. But, thank you all for going forward with all that you're doing. And that was we didn't know if it was successful or not. But I do want to say that the seed that was planted came to fruition about 30 years later.
Yeah.
And now it's understood that Olga, too, has accepted all the things we said. So I was proud and happy to be part of that.
Excellent. Okay, so I think I'm going to end the question and answer period, but I would like to give the microphone to Joanne Dufour, and she's got a very interesting announcement about their class number 6.
Well, thank you very much, Bud, and especially because you were part of that class number 5. So I appreciate your enthusiasm and your offer. I'm sure Glenn, who is with me now, will join me in what I'm going to be saying, because it was really at Glenn's leadership that the class was designed the way it was. There were 4 of us who came together, and each of us had an interest in the topic of nuclear weapons for different reasons, and we came from a different perspective. We're all members of the Olympia Coalition Against Nuclear Weapons, but we spent about 27 hours or so trying to formulate, so what are we going to do and how are we going to get this course going? The course that materialized is an 8-hour course. And Glenn was the one who actually took the initiative in creating the flow into 4 different classes, each 2 hours. We decided that offering it only once a week really, these days with all the competition of Zoom, and it was intended to, when we started, it was pre-COVID, so it wasn't intended to it was only one night a week. But we decided that once we went on Zoom, there was going to be too much competition. So we offer it 2, one night and one afternoon. And so the next round, and it's been exciting to see this spread. How it spread was to we got support from people all over the country to advertise it. And so now each time we offer it, we're getting more diversity. And we've really reached the East Coast and the Southern Coast, and we've reached people north of us in the central part of the country, and Californians and Texans and all kinds of people. So the diversity, I have grown to respect the participation so much, especially, for example, in our 5th class, where you had such knowledgeable people join us that I bow my head in deference to the experiences that come from our participants, because I think all of us are learning in the process. So what we have designed, the next round is the same continuous flow with, of course, input. Each time we do it, we get input from participants, and we revise accordingly. And so it's going to start on February 23rd, which is a Tuesday evening. And for those of us on the West Coast, it starts at 5 p.m. And the reason it's so early is because we really do have participants now from the East Coast. And when we started later, my gosh, it was getting impossible for them. So we backed it up to 5 o'clock. So that's an 8 o'clock start, because it's a 2-hour class. And a lot of our folks are older. So, by 10 o'clock, you can't always keep an older audience. So we had to keep that in mind. So that's one offering. The second time that same class is offered is going to be on the following Saturday. And Saturday, again, we programmed it for us here at 10 o'clock in the morning. And of course, that's 1 o'clock on the East Coast. So we've become very time conscious in planning this. So we're hoping that you can join us. I appreciate the testimonies of the participants, and they're very appreciative suggestions. We're just reading through those suggestions now, because we do ask for evaluations, and then we integrate those evaluations into the next course. The warning is that we started off collecting, each of us came from a different perspective. Glenn came from his longtime advocacy for peace in this state. And I'm sure many of you know of his incredible work. Glenn Glenn now has been handling the Zoom, even though one time we had the support of Antioch, which helped us, which was nice, because that got us to the East Coast, because they spread it throughout their whole Antioch system. Then we have Mark Fleming. Now, Mark Fleming is affiliated with the Veterans for Peace, so he's the veteran voice, where the other 3 of us come from more of a peace perspective. But he is, of course, Veterans for Peace has a very strong peace perspective. And so he brings to our sessions the knowledge of the military and what they are doing. And, all the complicated things that go along with the kinds of weaponry, which there are some of us like me who don't know any of that and don't always keep it straight. So it's nice to have that other perspective. Then we have from bringing a perspective of direct action. We have a gentleman who joined us from Cleveland, Ohio, and he's been a resident in Washington State for about 5 years, but a very strong peace history because he took direct action at Ground Zero, and so kind of represents the Plowshares division and others across the country who have made direct action. My association of all those four, I consider myself the least timed experience, even though when I think about it, it goes all the way back to my teaching days when I got to work with people at the UN. But I got into this because I volunteered for the United Nations office for the year that they had put on their intergenerational conference on disarmament. And I ended up doing a blog and met a lot of the people in New York who were connected with the disarmament community. And so that brought me to get to meet and feel very empowered that I finally found some like-minded souls when I moved here.
So Joanne, can you summarize when the classes are and who they contact?
Okay, well, you contact me and I included my contact information, and Glenn also included his contact information, but I'm the one who is kind of like the registrar and will send you out the notices. It's February 23rd and 27th is the first week, and then it goes on for 3 subsequent weeks on the first 3 Tuesdays and Saturdays of March.
Okay, superb.
And so thank you.
So if I would highly recommend it. It was a superb class. I learned a lot about nuclear weapons, and I'll just summarize it that way. So 2 other quick announcements. The local group in Skagit Valley, No More Bombs. If you want to know more about us, just go to nomorebombs.org, and we have an excellent website. We put out monthly newsletters that are very up to date, and it talks about what we're doing, what we're organizing, and what you can do to help our cause. We'd love to have many of you join us, and I promise you an action-packed 2nd, 3rd, and 4th quarter meetings. I think I'm going to end the meeting unless someone else has a comment.
Who got the books?
Well, I gave one to Holly. So the first person to raise their hand is going to get the 2nd book. So I'm looking for a hand. Joanne.
Oh my goodness,
and,
okay.
And
wonderful.
Actually, if you folks stay on, there's more than 2, but we'll get books to people that want them. So I'm going to end the meeting because I like to start on time and I like to end on time. And I promised you our 3rd quarter meeting will do the same. The rest of the folks that are going to get a book, I'd like you to stay on so I can get your information. So thank you all, bless you all, and you have a great week and year.